Welcome, everybody, to our next speaker for the Quantum Integration Summit. I'm Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Awareness Coach, and I have the pleasure today to introduce to you a very well-known teacher, Acharya Shunya, and she is here to share with us all of her wisdom. But before we get started, I just want to share with you a little bit about who she is and the work that she does in the world. So Acharya Shunya is a truth teller who facilitates authenticity, self-remembrance, and the divine pathways to awakening related to the feminine. She is the first female head of her spiritual lineage that traces its roots to 2,000 years ago in India. She is the imparter of the goddess archetype theory as a pathway to soul ascension. Shunya reinterprets and recontextualizes the ancient Vedic wisdom of Dharma teachings, of Advaita Vedanta non-dual teachings, and Ayurveda's lifestyle wisdom and yoga. She is also the author of 3 books, 2 best-selling books that have already been out, Ayurveda Lifestyle Wisdom, and her second book, The Sovereign Self. And her latest book coming out on September the 6th, I believe, is Roar Like a Goddess, Every Woman's Guide to Becoming Unapologetically Powerful, Prosperous, and Peaceful. So let's get started. Sorry, I'm just pulling up some notes here that I wanted to refer to as I speak with you today. So I am so excited to have you here. I've had the opportunity, as may some of my listeners, to listen to your podcast called Shadow to Self. And I was listening to one of the recent podcasts that you shared. The title was, What's the Deal with the Goddess Mangoes and Handbags? Where you discuss the goddess Lakshmi, who's the goddess of abundance, who, I've had an interesting history with, as she's shown up in my life in lots of different forms. But more specifically, the disconnect of spirituality and the body. And you say in the podcast that some of your listeners were a little distressed when you made comparisons between mangoes and handbags. And in your response, you shared that this dismay for some of your more pious listeners actually reveals a deeply entrenched false belief system around abundance in the world, and more specifically, a worldwide movement to separate spirituality from wholeness, spirituality from embodiment, and spirituality from the material. So I wanted to start off with this question. Why do you think that there's been such a focus on holiness while there's been a blindness to wholeness? And what do you think has actually kept us from both?
I'm so glad we start there, because this return to wholeness versus holiness, in fact, the denial of holiness, not just the inclusion of holiness, but to deny that now in favor of wholeness, is my signature as a teacher that comes from the tradition that has given the world what it means to be holy, really. In that sense, I think all religions, Hinduism, Christianity, and Judaism, and all religions that have emerged in the last couple of 100 years are perhaps outdated in their definition of what it means to be spiritual. I'm really thinking that spiritual point 1, and now we're ready for spiritual point 2, where we no longer need to deny the world to ascend in the spiritual ladder, so to say. I think it was a very quick go-to belief system that to be poor is to be pious, to be celibate is to be pious, to be self-abnegating and denying is to be pious. Those are very quick certificates that we can gain. Look how pious I am. But my query now, and interestingly, the query of the ancient Vedas, which precede all religions in Hinduism, is, well, Can you live in the world and not lose your mind? Can you enjoy sex, food, clothes, handbags, mangoes, bananas, and desserts and food and yummy relationships, and yet be balanced, yet be mindful, yet be ethical? And I think this is a much more mature question than let's just put a blanket padlock on all these things and in different ways call them either sin or temptations or just the fall of humankind. And I found that the tradition I grew up in India, the Hinduism I grew up with, was still very much preaching holiness. And it really looks up to teachers who can posture how much they've sacrificed. But internally, I was like, this doesn't make sense. These people are fake. They're spiritual bypassing. And then I heard all about the fall of leaders from every such celibate, overly holy tradition. And then I knew that we really have to return to the holistic teachings of the philosophy or the consciousness that precedes any religion. And the Veda is that philosophy which precedes Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Sufism, all these religions that emerged from India, to come back to, are you whole? Can you enjoy a banana? Can you enjoy a bag?
Yeah.
And can you still feel radiant like a goddess without being apologetic? So I wanted to bring those points up, Adrienne. Thank you
Yes.
for seizing that opportunity to
Yes.
bring
Well,
it up.
it really spoke to me when I started to become more familiar with your books and your ideas and your podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? That is my vision, and it's mostly just been emerging from inside of me. You know, I can't say that it's just like a calling. And as one of my other guests who I interviewed earlier for the summit was describes it, he says that there's like a soul of a new self being called into consciousness by consciousness itself. And that really resonated with me. And to highlight two of the other things that you shared that really stood out to me just now is that this level of judgment that we have in spirituality, which doesn't include, like, we're by nature in material bodies and we must consume material items, and but some people can be judged for it and others are more, you know, as you mentioned, holy. And secondly, I just wanted to add and highlight is this idea of the divine, and even the word spiritual has become so tarnished in a way because so many different traditions have tried to own it and possess it, when it's actually the birthright of all humans. And so for me, what has affected my path is, or what did affect my path was trying to fit myself in different boxes of tradition that didn't include all of me. And I was always so baffled and confused. So I appreciate you making these ideas, expressing them so eloquently with all of your knowledge and your wisdom of your tradition and your path.
I think I felt the same as you.
Yeah.
And though I was a tradition holder, and it was really easy for me to sit in my robes and then just posture.
Yes.
But I didn't want to posture. I didn't want to borrow the robes of celibacy and poverty and sacrifice and all of that. I wanted to be a real, fully embodied woman, a woman with passion, a woman with creativity, a woman with her sexuality. And I wanted to be recognized for the spiritual teacher I am. I'm my mystic, my inner mystic is awake. And it doesn't matter if she wears jeans or the Hindu robes. She is who she is.
Yes.
And that's when I felt like, gosh, I can't find any role models, at least not in my Indian setting,
Yes.
And that's when I set out to become a role model. Like, okay, we just have to do it.
Good for you. I love it. Yes. So I was led to all world traditions and religions, looking for myself in them, looking for something that fit me. So I can very much relate. So I want to move on to my next question that I wanted to ask is in your book, The Sovereign Self, I love that title. You talk about what it takes to recognize one's innate worth and how it's connected to wholeness. So I wanted to get you to expand on those ideas a little bit and explain how do you see these two aspects, our innate worth and our sense of wholeness, connected in our humanity?
It's when we begin seeing ourselves that the innate self-worth arises, just like a blade of grass on this vast planet has an innate position in the global ecology. It
Yeah.
has an innate presence, and perhaps we wouldn't be what we are today without that one single blade of grass.
Mm-hmm.
Such is the nature of a holistically connected holographic universe that you can't really pluck out one atom, let alone a blade of grass. And if we are so vitally important and interconnected to each other and the all, then you have an intrinsic role. Your tantrums and your enlightenment, all of this has a respectful place. But we forget this in the pursuit of two other kinds of relationships, which are here for us to act as mirrors and for us to enjoy ourselves, but they're not really here to be distracted in and lose ourselves in, but we do. And those other two kinds of relationships, besides the relationship with ourselves, is the relationship with people and then the relationship with things. Like the boat, the house, the jewelry, the red dress and the black purse and all of that. It's like all of these have a role, and we just talked about how we don't want to diminish any of that. And yet they should have a secondary role in our life, and there should be a primary role with our own true self. And that includes cultivating inner stillness, self-awareness, quieting down the outer noises, the needs, the demands, the clamor, the approval or the disapproval, to just listen to that inner self, which speaks to us through intuition, through quiet guidance. And once we have this relationship in the on button versus the off or on, off, when
Yes.
it's permanently on, there's going to be a spontaneous, almost automatic enhance in your self-approval. We don't have to work at something that already exists. We have to work at what doesn't exist. Like we have to really work at feeling like a loser all the way, because our mind may think we're a loser, but if you keep thinking it, after a while we think we need to see a therapist. We need to talk to a teacher. We need to listen to a podcast that uplifts us. Why? Because we know something's not right with this picture. Because deep down, we are a successful creation in this beautiful, awesome, magical existence. So we can't be losers no matter what. That's why the self-worth comes inherent with our spiritual presence, our capacity. Are we tuned in or tuned out is the question. Power too comes automatically to us. I'm a much more empowered version of who I was, say, 25 or 30 years ago. But it's not like I borrowed the power. In fact, I don't. In fact, I'm just now in touch with what was my original inherent nature, to be powerful, to be worthy, to be loved, and to give love. These are all, they come with the packaging. We're spirit and we own it. And that's why in my Sovereign Self book, I went to an effort to teach about emotional sovereignty, spiritual sovereignty, even if we live with people and have intimate relationships and commitments, as I do, as you do. But are you emotionally sovereign? That is the question. Because that will determine your self-worth.
That is so powerful, and it's as I've shared with many of my other speakers, that none of us were born with a user's manual or a handbook about how to navigate this, and a lot of the wisdom traditions, academia, don't even include this part, this embodied part of our brain that we use to do all of our thinking. And so while you were speaking, I know that probably I speak for many people when I share that, as a young person, I used to suffer from panic attacks. And I was scared of the panic attacks, and I didn't know what they were called, and I didn't know what was happening to my body. So it wasn't just the panic attacks, it was the fear of the panic attacks. And it wasn't until I began meditating that I had the inner resource to actually see what that information was trying to communicate to me. And it's in my body's infinite wisdom, because it had been so devalued in a way, this body that we have, when it's so intelligent and precious, and our vehicle for this lifetime. So so there was another thing that you said in your book, The Sovereign Self. You talk about kind of on the same topic, about people are locked into their own prisons of shame and compulsion or panic, blame, obsession, and how people can begin to break free. I kind of mentioned my own experience, but as a wisdom teacher, what do you attribute this to? And do you see this as a result of the fundamental rejection of the body in the frame of like the whole self?
Yeah, the splitting of the spirit from the body, matter and consciousness are separate containers, and one is foul and the other super elevated. I think this is an inherent script that we've all been handed out. So somewhere when our body stinks and smells and fails, or is clumsy, or is even diseased, we feel embarrassed. And similarly, the mind, which is something in between, which is an awkward in between. And according to the Vedic tradition, which I represent, it is still matter, just a more, it's reflecting the spirit more. It too is, when it's identified with the body, it's kind of defiled, filled with lust and filled with anger. And then when it starts seeking the spirit, it's good, it's getting better, it's almost home. And while I agree that the mind can go either way and it becomes our friend or remains our enemy, I feel like this is very dark and harsh separation of the energy, going downhill and no recovery, or uphill and yay, way to go. I feel that the prisons of shame and blame include the scripting from religions. And I'm not anti-religion.
No.
I'm not that person, but I feel like we need to use discernment to pick what the original reason why it has attracted millions of people. And the original reason was compassion.
Yep.
The original purpose of religions was compassion, protection, grace, and the belief that there is a higher power to which you can surrender. And the Vedas take it to the next level and create this whole concept of bhakti and karma yoga, which literally means when you surrender, you don't just surrender your thinking capacities, you surrender your ego too, your mistakes too. You belong to that original creation. So you can never drop in your cosmic status beyond a certain point. Yep, you fell down, you made some mistakes, but those mistakes happen. So it's a school of the soul. So you learn and you grow. And that some of that shame and blame reduces when I include the source energy along with my bumbling, awkward, learning, confused, ignorant, blind, scripted, conditioned energy.
Mm-hmm.
when I bring the two together, the higher intelligence and my, smaller brain, gut, willpower intelligence, I feel better. And every night I give myself a hug, for example. And in sovereign self, I do want people take responsibility about their own, like, incessant thinking, where we make ourselves sick with our entitled of fool's rage and fool's fear, all of it imagined, none of it real, catastrophizing away, and either in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, pleasing people constantly. This is all in some make-believe fantasy world where we're like, just surviving. We're panicking, we're paralyzed, or we are traumatized, or we're holding on to dysfunctional relationships from like some overblown need for security. And in sovereign self, I calm everyone to say, look, there are four goals, not just security, but also pleasure and playfulness, and also dharma, to question what is what and how can you bring in a higher wisdom. And finally, moksha, which means, are you free in this moment to breathe,
Yes.
to sing, to be, to become, and to even forgive yourself? I think ultimately knowledge, the kind that, I'm not saying I'm the exclusive owner of that knowledge, but I'm definitely one of the communicators of a very high knowledge system, which you love, which is Vedanta. And Vedanta literally means where rhetorical, intellectual knowledge ends and where the experiential knowledge begins, of that deeper, of the potential of an open sky within you, where you actually begin breathing slowly when the world insists that you hyperventilate and you be anxious, and you choose to not be anxious, and you choose to change that anxious paradigm through deep belly breathing, or lying back on the grass and gazing at the sky in the daytime, or even better yet, at the nighttime. It brings everything in perspective. Vedanta is about experiencing your spiritual being, not just talking about it or arguing about it, or putting it up on an altar and then venerating it like my exclusive God. It's really about sharing that true potential that we all have as self, beyond the body, beyond the body, beyond the personality, beyond the story. Yeah.
I love it. You said a lot of interesting things, but just the idea that you point to the four different aspects, to pull back the lens of how we operate as having a knowing, embodied knowledge of all aspects, all layers of our consciousness, including our divinity or our source, or whatever you want to call that in your tradition. And that's how Vedanta really spoke to me, and finally, something that I can, something that feels true, not just from a mental space, but it's actually a path of the spirit, our consciousness, our higher consciousness, being allowed and having permission to have an embodied experience without all the judgment and the shame and the guilt and all of the things that take us away from being in relationship with ourselves, or the parts that we judge that aren't acceptable. So yeah, that has very much been my journey, and Vedanta has helped me to grow in that and to validate it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's so, as I've shared with you, it's so meaningful to me as a woman to meet a female Vedanta teacher. And as I mentioned to you earlier, all my studies of the Vedas are largely from a male perspective, which is, nothing's wrong with that. It just, some of the perspectives didn't resonate because there was something fundamentally missing. And so while this knowledge isn't gendered, it doesn't There is no, I mean, we are engendered bodies, but the soul doesn't necessarily have a gender. So I wanted to speak to you about the idea that there is so much knowledge available. In fact, our whole experience is only available because we're in a body. And yet, the reality has remained that this is unconscious for many. And do you think this is a result of the trauma? Because our body is actually the site of all of our experiences, including our trauma. So my question is for you. Do you think that part of this rejection or this unconsciousness around the body is related to the fact that our body is the site of all of our trauma, all of our deepest emotional and psychological wounding?
So true. It
Yeah.
is so true. And we have to make an effort through our conversations, through our discussions, through our support of each other, by calling a spade,
Mm-hmm.
really. That enough of abandoning the body. All religions universally have at least accepted that the body is a temple of sorts, that is a vehicle for our awakening. And yet, when it comes down to pragmatic, practical things, the body is put aside for the spirit to gain access, because the body has lust, which can be considered a distraction. The body has hunger, which is like a nuisance. You got to stop and eat all the time. So then institutionalized fasting was introduced.
Yes.
Then body has need to sleep. So then they were told, well, wake up early and stay awake and meditate. And so much was mentioned that is traumatic to the body. And then different gendered bodies or gender expansive bodies have especially been marginalized, punished. There is a collective trauma to female bodies from, it's called a witch wound, from witch burning and female infanticide and rapes and sexual trafficking of women. And in the research of my latest book, Roar Like a Goddess, I came across something, it's an actual phenomenon, actually a clinical syndrome called patriarchy stress disorder, PSD, which we believe that women, like a mother, is transferring on to her daughters through DNA, like our DNA is shrieking with terror, even though we're having this nice life in the modern world of today. You and I may not be facing it like in our face, though not a single woman on earth, from the CEO of a company to a great, Hollywood star, nobody can say they didn't face hostility or second-class treatment just because they're a woman. Nobody can say that. Nobody can say they didn't get this little bit of disrespect to outright abuse and being taken advantage of just because they're a woman. And what to speak of people who are of non-binary genders. And in a patriarchy planet, body itself is considered polluted, and body versus spirit, spirit wins. That's a patriarchal thinking. Celibacy is upheld, and then sexual virility of a man is upheld. But
Yeah.
for a woman, it questions all the way to her character.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. And finally, if you are a disabled body, an older or a very young body versus a youthful, virile body, a queer body, a female identified body, and like I said, a gender expansive body, well, all these bodies as a clutter are like not worth it. They're not important, versus that male body that's virile and sexual. And this is at the heart of patriarchy, is this divisiveness between what is considered weak and what is considered strong. What we have to do is call a spade and now talk about equality. Now talk about how every blade of grass deserves respect, and what to say of an entire human being, be they of any gender, race, or sexual preference. it's time. I really feel it's like it's now upon us. And women, even more than men, are going to lead that conversation. So I could totally sit behind my altar. I have people who look up to me all across the globe, and I can just sit there and pretend that I have the best life, maybe different from the rest of everyone else, but I have it all. Instead, I chose to be vulnerable and in an enlightened way. As you know, in Sovereign Self, I talk about enlightened vulnerability. And I wanted to say it's a kind of like a me too. I've had it too. But then it's not just a helpless me too. It's like, well, here is what the goddesses did in their archetypes to deal with abuse or disrespect. And maybe we can roar in our lives too, so it never happens again. It's time to bring about a change.
Yes, I feel it. I feel it. I love that. Thank you. Um, yes, and it's, in regards to Vedanta perspective, it's like the wounds of the masculine who have had to reject their bodies to some degree, and to be very uh, disciplined in order to be the protectors and to be the strong, and how what a burden that has been for men, and the violence that it's the self-violence first that it has caused for them, and then how that is expressed onto quote unquote weaker bodies, which tend to be the feminine. So like you said, it's a holographic universe and it's all connected. So a lot of times I know that when people hear the word patriarchy, um, people can get a little defensive that somehow it's being judged or criticized, without just being able to acknowledge that this has been, everyone has paid the price to a certain degree of this.
Everyone.
Yeah,
Patriarchy is not just endorsed by men, it's endorsed by men, women, and people of any gender who want to play that game.
yeah,
And everybody is a victim, especially men, because they are not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to express their feelings. They are called sissy or wimps. They are existentially frightened, but they can't show it like we women can.
yeah,
It's creating an artificial expectation from everyone.
yeah,
And I think patriarchy began long time ago when
yes.
when we were like maybe brand new on the planet.
Yeah, it was part
I
of our
think
learning curve.
it's
Yeah,
outdated now.
yeah,
Yeah. But it persists. So that's why we're still talking about it and trying to find creative ways to illumine our own self. Because when we wake up from that conditioning, it snaps. It can't affect us that much. I've grown up with a male guru, and I'm very close to my father, and they're very feminine men. They're balanced.
hmm,
And I'm a masculinized woman. I'm balanced. We can touch our inner man or inner woman or inner mixed gender. There's even a concept of mixed gender God in
yes.
Vedas. Yeah.
What is it? What is, can you tell us the name of the half female and half male?
Ardhanarishvara. It's
Yeah,
half Shiva, half Shakti, half male God, half female God.
yes, I love that
And
image.
you cannot tell if that God is masculine or feminine. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that there is a verse which says that I am that self that dwells in all beings, men, women, and those of mixed genders. So there's a complete recognition of all kinds of bodies,
Yeah.
but the self is the one in all of them.
Hmm. And it's the energy, right? The masculine and feminine energies.
Yeah.
So, before I let you go today, I have a couple more things I wanted to speak to you about. So in your book, The Sovereign Self, you talk about some practices to suggest to those who want to begin to cultivate a sense of unshakable sovereignty or peace in their everyday lives. Um, and so at this time in the world's evolution. I don't remember any of my other lives, but right now I know that a lot of people are struggling, fearful, uncertain about what's going to happen. So, what do you share with people in regards to starting to cultivate that inner sense of peace and knowing and calm?
Great question,
Mhm.
especially right now. And when life is coming at you violently with its waves of change, impermanence, transience, loss, even death, disease, of course, just a lot of unpredictability. The way we can cultivate predictability is to connect with that inner observer of all this change, which remains the same. And it means stepping back inside you to observe even the changes in your mind and know that you're not the mind. In fact, last night itself, my mind was very active for some reason, and I was seeing a lot of like diverse images. And I'm not fascinated by my mind that much now. So I'm like, oh, how cool. My mind's like a kaleidoscope of images and feelings, and I was just observing them. And as an observer, I was completely quiet. Now, if I had been lost in the mind, if I had no sense of I'm separate from the mind, I observe my breath, I'm not the breath. I observe the body, but I'm not the body completely. I'm a dweller in the body. Similarly, I use the mind, it's like my instrument, but I'm not the mind. Then if I didn't know that, then I would be like feeling the pins and pricks of every image and every sensation. And there were really weird things that were happening kaleidoscopically from I don't know how many eons of lifetimes of images were just bubbling forth. And I'm like, oh, how cool is this? My mind's like like a carnival here. And it's like, midnight and I want to go to bed. So then I was like, okay, we're just going to watch it for a while. And then it became boring and I fell asleep. It's like if you can separate a little, and this is called witnessing,
Mhm.
and there's a whole chapter on how to witness life and life's events projected in your mind as the steady, quiet witness who is one with that supreme consciousness. And as you begin witnessing, you'll find that you're able to witness the ups and downs of life, the curveballs of life, the changeability of life. And yet, once again, as we discussed earlier on, to be a witness is our real nature. To be an actor is not our real nature. So as we witness, we start feeling calm, relaxed, informed, curious, and unharmed. And so my recommendation is to carve that stillness within and to become familiar with that awareness, which does not modify with the objects in the awareness. Awareness remains as awareness itself, peaceful, blissful, and light-filled.
Very good. All right. So lastly, I just wanted to finish with the whole impetus for this summit that I created called Quantum Integration is I wanted to speak with experts in different fields in order to get a clearer picture of what it means to be a self at this time and um, what it is to evolve as a self and create a container that can hold everything that we are without having to, as Carl Jung said, cut off portions of ourselves that are unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is do you see the correlation between wholeness, being holy, and a healthy self, like quintessentially connected for describing like our condition as multidimensional beings with a mind, a body, and a spirit?
Yeah, great questions and a great purpose for this summit. Timely contemplation. What does it mean to be self now? It's like we are already self, but how do we come more from there? And my go-to word has been authenticity. And authenticity can sometimes be seen as speaking your mind or saying it like it is. It's always like telling someone how authentic you are. No. Authenticity means also being authentic to your own feelings, your emotions, your needs, your limitations, your biological, emotional self being given its due space
Mhm.
in a larger spiritual container.
Mhm.
So if I'm going to be authentic, then they have lots of periods of just doing nothing. People ask me, well, you must be so busy. Sure, because I have lots of periods of doing nothing. Because that's what my small self needs, to be in authentic alignment with my higher self, my true self. That's one thing for sure.
Mhm.
So for me, authenticity has been speaking my truth on my podcast or yours, your summit, writing it, trying to live it, finding self-deception within me to come to more and more light, but not shaming myself for the self-deception, because we all go there to survive,
Yeah.
but now learning to thrive and play and grow on this planet. I think it's time for human beings to take it to humanity 2.0, where we're not just thriving, surviving, but we're thriving, and we're holding hands and playing and acknowledging each other. I see you. I see you. It brings tears to my eyes. With all your differences, I see you. I honor you. I have room for you in my heart. And as we extend this gratitude and this embrace and inclusiveness to others, it shall come back to us, and we're going to change our planet.
Mhm. Yes. Beautiful. Yes. And do you have
You
compassion?
ask deep questions.
Yeah. That's the kind of girl I am.
Mhm.
I often got in trouble. People didn't know what to do with me. So I had to start surrounding myself with people that could not only engage with me, but answer these types of questions that I think really matter, and they've always mattered to me.
Mhm.
But for many people, it's not that they don't understand, it frightens them, I think, to imagine how big they truly are.
They're not ready now, but they'll be ready
Yes,
in the
but
future.
yes, and the remembrance of that, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
So I know that you're coming out with a book the day before this podcast launches. So I'm really excited about it. As I mentioned, it's called A Roar Like a Goddess. Um, that is coming out, and I can't wait to get my hands on it and and read it. But you kind of mentioned already a little bit what you're covering, but can you just extend a little bit more on what the audiences can expect to find out about in this new book?
I talked about how I went about creating a role model for myself because I didn't find any from the tradition I came from as a spiritual teacher,
Mm-hmm.
a courageous one, a real one, and a vulnerably enlightened one.
Yes.
But then, as a mother, as a wife, as a twice married woman, again, I was looking for role models of inner integration,
Yeah.
of empowered beingness and authenticity. And I went through a period of life when my first marriage fell apart and I felt shamed and blamed, not just by the Indian culture, but there is a world culture where if there is a divorce, a woman is more to blame than the man.
Yeah.
And because I'd grown up with these empowering stories, I kept churning them again and again. And I found in the Hindu goddesses Durga, Lakshmi, and Saraswati,
Mm-hmm.
really empowered messaging, symbolic teachings. So I brought these teachings into our 21st century world for women worldwide. And we talk about boundaries, we talk about breaking stereotypes, we talk about dealing with trauma by accepting all parts of ourselves radically, we talk about self-value. And we also talk about roaring goddess women from every culture, not just the Indian culture, ranging from Africa to Arabia to America to England, you name it. So it's a very here and now book.
Mm-hmm.
I use the goddess archetypes as tools, but it's not just a typical goddess book.
Yeah.
It's a women's empowerment book. It's being called a book which is about Vedic feminist spirituality. And it's a book in which I ask women and all people of any gender to step into their divine immensity. It's pretty much a book on what we're talking about, just
Yes.
with some fun storytelling.
I love it. I love it. I have done this intuitively. I've always been an avid reader, and I love stories and mythology, and I think that's the great thing about storytelling is that, you know, it's innate in us to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, if it's a goddess or a god, um, and really borrow their qualities if we haven't developed them fully or had permission to develop them for ourselves. I know I used to do this with Hanuman, the male monkey god, who moved mountains, and that was a very powerful. Like I would tap into that energy in my life when I needed it. So I love that possibility. So before I let you go today, I could talk to you for hours, really, to be honest, but I'm so thankful that you were able to offer this hour of time together. So if people want to find out more about the work that you do or the services, meditation teaching that you provide, I've included your website and your contact information. But I just wanted to, I've been giving all my speakers an opportunity to present any special offers, and if you have any, it's not required. But I just want to give that opportunity to everyone. So
In the wake of my book coming out,
yes,
September 6th, we have a bouquet of offerings on the divine feminine teachings from my soul. And first and foremost, I want to invite people to a book launch and a women's empowerment retreat on September 17th online. And they can sign up by going to my website. And it's free, just the registration is required. And I'm being joined by some of the topmost teachers in spirituality in America who will also be offering their roar, their teachings, their insights.
awesome. Okay.
Yeah. And hope I'll see you there.
Yes,
That's going to be a
definitely.
nice gathering. And when I invite women, I'm not just talking about biological women, I'm talking about anybody who wants to inhabit feminine spaces in their mind and consciousness.
Yes.
And so we are coupling the book launch and the book retreat because it felt like it's not just launching a book, we're launching a paradigm of thinking.
Yes.
So that's what's happening from 9 to 1. And then when they're on my websites, which are acharyashunya.com and awakenedself.com, they will find out a whole bunch of ways of learning more about my goddess teachings through workshops, through a 9-day goddess festival that begins later in September. So
Exciting.
many things.
Okay, well, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that link to the events on, was it September the 17th, you said?
Yep.
I will actually put that link in
All
at the end
right
of this.
then.
Yeah, at the end of this video so people can join. And thank you for letting me know about it because I was not aware of this event. So thank you. And with that being said, so appreciate you gracing us with your presence and sharing your wisdom and your insight. It was so valuable, and I so much enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you.